Hi guys, my name is Catherine and this is Extreme Basics. Today we're going to be learning about digital art, specifically Photoshop. So before we really get into this video, I just want to say this is the basics of Photoshop for drawing specifically, so if you're using Photoshop for photo editing, we're not going to be getting into that today. Also, I'll be using a Wacom tablet. I'll have the link in the description below if you want to check out this one. You pretty much need a tablet when drawing digitally, but you can use a mouse. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's 10 times easier to use a tablet. And there's also a lot cheaper options, so you can go on eBay and find a used one, or there's other brands. Wacom is the main brand, and I've had them and I know that they're good, but there's a lot of other brands as well. Used tablets can be really cheap, or there's some brands that are just as cheap as $40 new, so if you just research for a few minutes, you'll find something that works for you. So basically, with the Wacom tablet I'm using, you just have to set it up once, and then every time you use it, you just plug it in and it's ready to go. It has this pen that's like a stylus, and at first it was hard to get used to, clicking down on the tablet and that clicks on the computer screen, but once you use it for a few days, you really get the hang of it. So today we're just going to be going over the basics of Photoshop, like I said. If you're using a different program, a lot of them are really similar, so this might be helpful, but if you want me to talk about any other programs in the future, please let me know. So I'm running Photoshop 2018 on my computer, and basically I only use a few tools in it, so let's just talk about it. Okay, so once you first open Photoshop, this is the screen that you'll be seeing, so you'll just say Create New, and then you'll get a bunch of options about sizes. So normally, I usually just do I think the default Photoshop size is 7x5 and it's going to be horizontal. That's fine. Sometimes I like using a vertical canvas. It's really up to you. You can also change the size once you're actually in Photoshop, but let's just do a 10x10 just so it's a perfect square. Also, with resolution, it kind of depends on if you want to print or just use it digitally. Since we're just going digital, we're going to be using 300 resolution, and we're doing RGB color. Okay, and then you say create. Okay, so here's my canvas. It's a perfect square. As you can see right now, I only have one layer, and it's just a white background layer. I'm pretty sure that's what Photoshop gives you as a default for background, but you can change it to whatever you want when you're initially creating your Photoshop size canvas. So the most important thing with Photoshop is layers. At first, I didn't believe it, and I tried to ignore it, but it's really important that you use layers. So to create a new layer on this bottom corner, you'll just click that. It looks like a little page with a little turned over corner. And as you can see, it's checkerboard, which means that it's just transparent. There's nothing there. It's just clear until you draw on it, or you use a paint bucket tool or whatever. The most important tool for drawing in Photoshop is obviously going to be the Paintbrush Tool. So right now I have a huge paintbrush, and since it's black and white and my white is the top color, then I won't be able to draw anything, or at least it won't show up because we have a white background. So if you click these little arrows next to your colors, then it'll switch them. So now since my brush is huge, we're going to make it a little smaller. So how to do that is, there's a few different ways. In this top corner, if you click this drop down arrow next to the 700, so that's what my brush is. So there's so many different kinds of brushes. I'm not going to go over all of them, but basically we're just going to use a hard round, and instead of 700, that's like how many pixels big it is, you can go down and we'll just say we want it to be 45. And then you can see it's a lot smaller, and then I can just draw with it. And when I'm drawing, I'm just using my pen on my tablet, so nothing too crazy there. As you can see, when I use it, everything's the same size. It's 45 pixels for how big it is, but it's constantly going to be that size. Now, if you have a tablet, this is when it's really cool, because your tablet, depending on the kind you get, I know that better tablets have more pressure points to them, but the tablet I'm using has pressure points. So if you click this button over here, it looks like a weird target with a pen on it. Then you can use different pressures. So I'm pushing down harder, it's getting bigger. I'm like pulling up lighter, not pushing down as hard, and then it gets smaller and just smaller. Thinner, yeah. It gets smaller and thinner. So that's a really cool thing that Photoshop allows, especially these tablets. If you're just using a mouse, you can't do that because it doesn't know how hard you're pressing down. Okay, so knowing just this so far, we can already like start creating art and start doing really whatever we want. But we want to change the color, we want to have fun, we want to do lots of other things. So basically, I'm just going to go over like the main things that I use to create digital art. There's so many different tools in Photoshop, there's so many things you can do, so I'm just going to go over the main things that I use to make most of my art. Some art will be a little different and I'll use a few special tools, but this is just main tools for most of the time. So first let's go over color. So as we saw before, these are little squares of color. So the black one, if you click on black, now this one's on top, so that's the color that we're actually going to be using. You can see there's millions of color possibilities. All the colors are on the side. You can scroll up and down this spectrum, and then when you're actually on blue, for example, you can change it to be a lighter blue, a darker blue, a richer blue. There's endless possibilities. So there's also the hexadecimal number system. So if you find a color that you really like on coolers.com or something, then you can just copy and paste the number right here and you'll get the exact color. But that's not super important right now. We'll go over RGB colors and hexadecimals more in another video. So you can just pick a color that you want. Let's say we want like an orange kind of color, and then you click OK, and now you have that color. And since we have this white on our other one, if we use our arrows again, we can draw over it in white. Okay, so this is when layers are so important that I can't stress it enough. When you're doing stuff in Photoshop, you can undo. Now you can do this in two different ways. You can say, edit, undo brush tool, and you can do that a few times. On the keyboard shortcut, which keyboard shortcuts are so important, there's Control Z, which will undo what we just undid. So it's kind of like you can only go back and forth, back and forth. But there's also Control Alt Z, which means you can just go back, if that makes sense. So another example of this, in case that didn't really make sense to you, is if you draw a little flower and then you draw a little star. Now if we just go Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, we're never going to get to the flower. We're only going to get to the star, and just keep undoing and then undoing that undo and then undoing and then undoing the undo. But if we want to get rid of the flower also, we have to go Control Alt Z, we get rid of the star, and then we step another step backward and we get rid of the flower. Another keyboard shortcut I use literally all the time, instead of going up here and changing the size of my brush with this slider, if you go on your keyboard and you go the big square bracket, if you click it once, it'll get one step bigger. If you click it a bunch of times, it'll get a lot bigger. And if you click the left square bracket, it'll get smaller. Another tool that's really helpful is this eyedropper. And the eyedropper basically says, what color is this? And it picks up that color and it puts it back in your color square that you're using. So this is really great if you're using a lot of different colors. Then if you forgot what it is, or since you only have 2 squares of color, you can easily go and pick up things. So if I'm doing this a lot, especially with blending, one thing that I like to do is a keyboard shortcut. Clicking B on your keyboard will go back to your brush, and clicking I will go back to your eyedropper. So you can select your color, go back to B, and then draw something. So as I said before, layers are so important. I used to think that they weren't important, but they really are, and they save so much time if you make any kind of mistake. So as we were talking before about how you can only step backwards so many times with Photoshop, it's so important to use layers. When you want to make a new layer, like we said before, you just use this little turn page. And now see, I have layer 2, layer 3, you can scroll through them. If you just drag them, you can put them in different places. So for example, if your line art is on layer 1, so our smiley face with little ears is on layer 1, since we put layer 2 underneath, if we find a fun color like a green, and we say okay, we have our brush, if we color in our smiley face, just super rough right now, for an example, you can still see the line art since it's underneath. But if we were to drag it on top, you wouldn't really be able to see his smile anymore because the color is on top. So we want the line art to be on top of the color. Now layers are so important because if you make a mistake, If you say, oh no, now I hate this green color, or I want to see what a different color would look like on him, you can use this little eyeball on the left side of your layer and click it, and now we don't see the green layer anymore. We can make another layer and use a different color and see if we like it better. Oh, let's try this orangish color and color him in. And we say, oh yeah, we like that so much better. Now we can just go to this green layer and drag it to the trash can and it deletes. So that's really helpful because, as you can imagine, in actual traditional art, if you were to color something green and all of a sudden you want it orange, there's a lot of problems that can happen. So Photoshop is a lot easier in that sense. Also, if you want to rename layers, which I highly recommend, I mean, we already have 4 layers. Even though there isn't stuff on every layer right now, it's a good habit to name layers. So you just double click where it says layer 4, for example, and then we can rename it color, because that's where our color is. Then for layer 1, if we forgot what's on it, we can click the little eyeball and see, oh yeah, that's our line art. So we double click layer 1 and we say line art and then click enter. There it is. Another tool that I use all the time for my digital art is the transform tool. This might get a little complicated because it feels like so much stuff is going on, but honestly, it can save you so much time and effort when you're actually doing art. It's so helpful. So just to make things less crowded, we're gonna just start over on our layer 3, which is blank right now. And let's pretend like we're drawing a character. So just for a quick example, we'll draw a stick character because why not? Perfect. So there's a few things that I could do with this guy. If I think, oh, he needs to be taller and thinner and not as short and stubby, then we use this lasso tool. So the third one down, if you hold down on this, right now I'm on the lasso tool, you can choose between different kinds of tools. I like using the lasso tool because it's the easiest for me, especially for artists. I feel like it's just the simplest thing. So with the lasso tool, all you have to do is click down and hold down and then just drag around your guy and then end your little lasso. Now this will select everything that's inside. Now since we're on this layer, it's only selecting the guy, it's not selecting the white background or anything. Now from here we can say edit, transform, scale. And so what this will do is we can make our guy thinner, we can make our guy taller, or if we hold down shift and then move it, it will keep the, oh sorry, my computer's slow. It will keep the exact ratio of the picture, so it won't skew or stretch or squash him at all. It'll keep him exactly the way that you wanted. But since we stretched him out and that's how I wanted it, then we made it like that, and then we can make him a little smaller. And then on this top bar, you have to click check mark. You can click this circle with a line through it if you say, oh no, I don't want that anymore. Or you can click check mark to say, yes, I want that transformation, apply it. Also, if you click enter on your keyboard, it will apply also. Now, as you can see, our guy is still selected, so all you have to do is either just with your lasso tool, click on the side, and he will deselect, or you can say Control D on your keyboard to deselect. I know that there's so many tools and there's so many keyboard shortcuts, it can be really overwhelming, especially if you're just starting, but just go in and play around with things. You don't have to remember the shortcuts right away, and you don't have to know every single tool. So how we just transformed him was a little complicated because we had to go up to the toolbar and click so many different things. So there is a keyboard shortcut that I find a lot easier. Basically, when you use the lasso tool. Also, if you just want to select part of a guy, so say I just want to select his head like that, you can do that. You don't have to select your whole character or everything. You just select, like we did before, then you go Control T on your keyboard, and then you have this kind of, like we had before, but now it's just easier. So we can see you can rotate, you can, remember, shift to keep his head the same ratio, or we can move the entire thing. Then remember, if you want it, you can either click enter on your keyboard or this little check, or if you don't want it, you can click the circle with a line through it, and then he'll go back to the way he was before. So, Control D, deselect, and we're back to this. Okay, I'm just gonna go over a few more tools because I don't really use that many when I'm making digital art. If you want to know more about what tools do, or if you're using Photoshop for photo editing or some other thing, we're gonna be making a video soon about all the major tools and all the different uses for Photoshop and everything like that. Opacity is a thing that you have to be a little aware of. So for example, you can do it by a layer. So a good tool for using this is if you're doing a sketch, like if this is just our rough sketch for our man, we can turn down the opacity on the entire layer right here on the bottom right with this little scale. We can just turn it down and he'll become a lot lighter. Then when you add a new layer, it's so much easier to use him as a guide and then make your final guy. If you don't want to use it in that way, which I use all the time, there's also opacity in the sense of a brush. So let me just get rid of that for now. So this is our orange color, but we can turn the opacity down on the top bar with this little scale. So now it's at 52% and it's a lot lighter. We can turn it down again to 12% and it's a lot lighter. Now you might be thinking, oh, this is cool for shadows and just having a lighter color, but that's not necessarily the case, because if you go over it again, you'll get this overlap as you can see here. Compared to if you just use a lighter orange at 100% opacity, you won't get that, even if you go over it 100 times. Another tool I really like is this little finger blendy guy. He just looks like a little finger blender, and he's called the Smudge Tool. There's also a blur tool, sharpen tool, but I usually use the Smudge Tool. So right now, I have it on this weird texture. As you can see, there's a ton of different brushes for a bunch of things. If you look in the top right corner, you can see that this is for the Smudge Tool, but there's ones for a brush, there's erasers, there's a bunch of textured things for a bunch of different things. So this one's a smudge. So all you do is, I'm going to make the brush a little bit bigger, and you just wipe it over things. Now because my brush is so big, as you can see, my computer had a problem with it for a second. So if you make it smaller, now all this really does is blends the color I have with this white, and it gives it a fun texture. So it's just something fun to play around with. Oh yeah, also, if you have this beige color or whatever color you have, and you want to go back to black and white, you can click this little black and white square next to the arrows, and it'll just go back to plain black and white. So here's me drawing a line just pretty fast with 0% smoothing on. And as you can see, it's really just me trying my best to draw a straight line. So this is 26%. And I don't know if you can see, it's a little delayed, so you can control it a little bit better. And see, compared to these lines, they just look a lot nicer. So if you're doing line art, I highly recommend this, or if you're using a mouse, this can make it so much easier to not get really bumpy, weird lines. At 50%, you can really see the delay. That's not my computer, that's just the delay of the control, if that makes sense. At 80%, it's super noticeable, and it's so easy to get a smooth, nice line. And then 100%. You can see the delay it has. At this point, it does get a little weird with the pressure sensitivity, but it's still pretty easy to use. Other than that, there's a ton of other tools in Photoshop that you can use for a million other things. These are just the main things I use as an artist. There's also things like a text tool, so you can type things out and have nice text with different fonts. There's just a magnifying glass so that you can zoom in or zoom out. There's a crop tool. There's a bunch of other selection tools if you want to select either an entire layer or just part of a layer or whatever. As I said before, we're going to be making a video for Photoshop for all the major tools for all uses of Photoshop soon. So let me know in the comments below if there's a specific tool that you want to know more about. Also let me know in the comments below if you want a video on anything specific related to art in any way. I'm planning on making animation videos and 3D modeling videos and painting videos. I make videos every 2 weeks on this channel, so please subscribe if you're interested in art, or if you're interested in coding, you can see Ben's videos every other week. Okay, thanks for watching. Have a nice day. Bye. Yeah.